Hey, I'm Nick, and I'm here to show you how the music and overall sound for Aspire in Asteo was created and implemented. I'll be adding some chapters down below if you want to skip ahead to whatever part is the most interesting to you. And first of all, before we begin, some disclaimers. This might not be the best introduction if you have no idea what audio middleware or FMOD is, but I'll do my best to try to explain as I go. And hopefully it won't be too confusing if you haven't seen any of this already, but I'll be doing my best to illustrate my points with examples of how everything works both in the software and in game. Much of what I show here probably won't be the optimal way of doing things. There are probably better solutions that people smarter than me can come up with. This is just the way that we did stuff in Aspire, and the result I think was pretty interesting. Also, huge spoilers for basically the whole game. So if you haven't played Aspire yet and you're interested in it, first of all, thank you so much. It means a lot to us. And go ahead and give it a go before you check out the video if you don't want to be spoiled. Also, this might ruin a little bit of the magic by seeing how things work, but maybe you'll find it interesting. So, basics real quick. Here we are in FMOD. And what is FMOD? Put simply, FMOD is a sound engine and software that allows you to create sound behaviors for games. It works very much like a DAW, and in my experience, it has been very user-friendly and easy to learn. They have a free license for small indie studios, which is what we use for Aspire as our studio's first game. And also, I just gotta say, their support and forums have been then great for solving any issues that I came upon. And it saved my butt a few times during production. And by the way, this is not sponsored. I just really enjoy FMOD. So let's have a quick look here, just an example to show how it usually works. This is an event, and these are things that the programmers can then call in the game so that the event plays and the sound comes out. What FMOD does is it allows me as the composer and sound designer to implement a lot of the logic in a way that doesn't require the programmer of the game to be doing as much work. So this really saved our hides because our programmers had a lot on their hands already, and so being able to do this and just tell them, oh hey, I need this event to play here, and I need it to be called like this, I need it to behave a little bit like this, there's this parameter here and there, and they can do that relatively quick was very important for us. So just a quick rundown of what this is. I have some audio tracks here. I could even add some other ones. I'm not gonna go into full tutorial mode here, but basically just to have an idea of what the interface here is doing, I can play the effects. I can add, instruments that play variations of the same effect, that I add different audio clips here, and I can control the volume and everything else. We also have some spatializer here, so that you can change the sound position, just to preview how it sounds in the game. Another thing that is very important and that we'll be talking about a lot during this are the parameters. They're basically variables. So for instance, here I have one here called fall height, and I set these parameters and I define how they are gonna behave and what they do to the sound. So for instance, this here, its volume is determined by the parameters value. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about how this specific one works once we get into the effects part. But first, I'm going to what is probably the most interesting and complex part of the project, which is the music. But again, if you want to skip ahead, just check out the chapters below. And without further ado, let's get going. So one thing that has always been on my mind, and Aspire turned out to be the perfect place to the perfect project to test that out and use that, was I always wanted to make to work on a soundtrack that was extremely reactive, and at the same time it felt very organic in reacting to the player. So I had some ideas in how we could achieve that, and how I could make and how I could create the illusion for the player of the music being played exactly for their gameplay. And I know this is kind of jargon already of what we talk about when we were talking about dynamic music for games, but I really wanted to have that feeling and have it be something organic, something that felt natural, and that didn't rely so much on crossfading and layers coming in and out. Even though I use that a lot in the soundtrack, as you will see in a bit, but in the overall grand scheme of things, I really wanted that for it to be organic, and so I had some ideas, but I always kept thinking, I don't know if this is gonna work. This seems like it's gonna be like a lot of busy work to get done in the way that I'm thinking, and I am very much an overthinker. And I wouldn't say I'm usually the best at optimizing these kinds of solutions. I can come up with them, but they might not be the most optimal way. And of course, that's when help comes in. Huge shout out to Zender Hume. He's a composer as well. He has an article that you can check out online. I believe it's called "Killing Off the Crossfade" or something to that effect. It was a huge help in kind of translating these thoughts that I had in my head of how I wanted to do that into actual tangible stuff. And so based on that, and I even use some of his terminology like imbricate, and you can find out more by reading that. Let's have a look at how this came to be. For the hearts, the initial, the first level of the game, it was kind of my testing ground. I told the guys at the team, okay, I have a crazy idea. It might work, it might not work, but since we're here, let's try it out. And if it works, we're gonna keep doing it for the rest of the game. If it doesn't, we'll just scrap it and think of a simpler way of implementing the music. And it worked. And I'm going to explain now what it was that we did. Just a quick rundown of what these things over here are. These are the audio tracks, and each of these is a sound clip. Yes, these are all different sound files over here. I'm going to explain what they do in just a second. And up here you have, time signatures and some markers for loops, these blue ones, and these green ones, they are the transitions. You can set them for conditions or without conditions for the music to change to a different place. So for example, I have here a transition to the piano layer 2, which is this one, and also to layer 3. You can jump around. What I have here is also quantization, so it will only do the transition in specific parts of the beat once the condition is set. And what this condition is, I have a parameter here called music section. This parameter changes as the player progresses through the level, and it informs the music to change to the next part. As you can see, this one is just a normal sound clip, and it is synchronous. It is, if I start playing here, it'll start playing here. If I start playing it here, it'll start playing here. And what these are is basically, I took the song and I broke it up into a lot of different tiny pieces. And I arranged these pieces here so that they play the song. So for instance here, this first one, it plays this. And the second one, the third. And once you play them all one after the other, you get the music. As you can see, even though it is broken up into a lot of different tiny pieces, it sounds just natural, like you would expect the song to be played. And this is the great trick of this method of implementing, is that, first of all, it's a lot of busy work of chopping up the pieces and making sure that the export does everything as you want, and then putting them in here. But the flexibility it gives you and the possibility to change the music in a way that feels very organic. Let me show you, not just keep talking about it. So if I have here, I have this part playing, and if the player gets to a section, this is when Ina is getting further and further from the chamber that she was placing. And so as you change this, you can see the piano gets softer and softer, but it still sounds like someone is just playing it softer. It doesn't sound like I crossfaded something else into it. It doesn't sound like a different piece of music. It doesn't sound like it sounds natural. And I can even transition back. And at the end here, we have this. What happens here is just a little reverb that comes on so that the ending is very, sounds final and not just like a dry cut. If I were to say, remove this reverb and play it here. Now the real trick to this is that all of the sounds, all of these little parts, they need to have the tail, that means the sound that happens a bit after you stop playing, it needs to be there. So that's why all of these are asynchronous. What this means is they won't play just when the playhead is on top of them. They will, once the playhead hits it, it'll start playing and it will play to the end. So as you can see, if I press play here, it'll be playing multiple of these at the same time. And that's what gives, you know, the natural sound. Once that was on and worked well, this came about. And this huge mess here is the second part of the heart's music. Now, this might be pretty intimidating and there's a lot going on here indeed, but I'll just break it down a little bit. And of course, for many games, this would be kind of overkill or unnecessary. I did this because I felt like the music in Aspire had to be very, very reactive, and this is kind of the vision that we had for the game from an artistic perspective. And so I went for it. Now, to explain what's going on here, this is the song that starts after the piano stops playing, as you start running with Ina and exploring the heart. So, you know, this. Of course, you might notice there's a few other transitions here. These are for the checkpoints. So if you start the music, if you reload the game at a point that is later in the music, then it just jumps straight to that part. And you can see here that I have soft piano A, soft piano B, soft piano C, D, E. These are just some markers here that I can jump to, and they are different parts of the loop. And what happens is that depending on which bar it is, I made a little different transition for when the player slides down that ramp into the section with the panels. Just a little touch to make it feel more part of the music. So for instance, if I were to change it now, this is the little piano piece that plays. And if I were to change it, say, here, and what happens is that inside these transitions, I keep playing the parts that are already playing, so these little pieces of the song, and I also add the little transition there. And it fits just nicely into the next part. And so here what's going on is we got this playing, And now there's the soft piano. And what I have here is the piano being played a bit harder. And it's not just a volume change, as it could be done, but it's an actual dynamic and new recordings of the piano. So it blends well with the previous piano. And I also use some of the more traditional ways of doing stuff. So for instance, I have a subsection parameter here, and what this parameter has is a 6-speed. This means that once the programmer doesn't need to change it gradually. He just says, oh, go to this value, and then it will do that over time as I set it over here. So if I change the subsection to 1, you can see that it slowly changes by that little yellow circle over there. And you can automate a lot of stuff here. So for instance, go in here and to the next section, which brings in the melody. And here I can just get the subsection to go up, and then the beat will come in by removing this EQ that I have here. And I can keep going. And then what happens in this section is that as you are exploring and going further and further on, as Ina is progressing towards the exit of the heart, I wanted to get more and more intense, but also there is a big moment. You have the bridge, right? If you played it, you know what I'm talking about. We wanted that moment to be a really big impact, both visually and musically. This is where all this craziness comes here, because I wanted this song, I wanted the music to change and be very different, and the player still has control. The player can still go forward and back on the bridge. The player can jump anytime they want. And I wanted the music to be very well synced with the moment that the player jumped. And also, the game is very much physics-based, so this means that we didn't know exactly how long the jump was going to be, how long she was going to slide specifically each time, how long the fall afterwards was going to be. So we had to get a bit creative with this. Once you are at the end of the lab, the beat kind of fades out, and then you have the arpeggios here, and what happens is it needs to change whenever you get out into the bridge section. So at any of these little bars is a moment where it can swap. And now I have this piano playing here, and this doesn't transition well into the rest. So as the player is approaching the jump, this goes to this, so the piano comes out, and whenever the player is ready to make the jump, now what happens here is, as you can see, I have a lot of different sounds here and a lot of different conditions, and it's really a lot of stuff. And I still wanted all of these possible transitions to feel organic. I wanted it to sound like this song, like you jumped at just the right time to be in time with the music. And in my testing, using the same sound source and just jumping back and forth through it, I didn't get to a result which I was satisfied with. So what I did was I prepared for every possibility. As you can see, there are some moments where the song will take a little bit to change, but in the grand scheme of things, these few milliseconds don't really change that much in the feeling of the timing as we tested. But each of these transition regions here goes to a different section over here, and all of them have different sounding endings, which were rendered based on being a transition that happens at this point. I'm not sure if I'm good at explaining this, but basically I prepared the music to be, oh, if it swaps here, then I'll just render the whole thing and then have it swapped over there. If it swaps here, then I'll change the composition and then I'll render that, and so on and so forth. And so as Sina jumps through the bridge and slides down, she starts to fall into the hole, and then we have some other things that are a bit physics-based and we don't know how long that is going to take. So we did some things. So for instance, if I get to the end here, and you'll see that there is a parameter called synth volume. And what this does is it allows the programmer to kind of just pull this down, and it will reduce the volume to kind of end the song. We did this with a little script that Bruno, our lead dev, made, and we used it a lot in a lot of stuff. You'll see it come back over and over again. But it's basically a proximity curve. It's kind of a rectangle or a box. It varies a parameter's value depending on the position the player is in the box. What we did here is we made this proximity box, and as she falls down, the synth volume keeps going down and down and down. And you'll see why this is important when I get to the third part of the music. But just to illustrate how this kind of jumps around, here's a little play of this part here. Now, you might be noticing that FMOD is lagging a little bit here, and that is because it's probably not optimized to handle so many events on a single thing playing all at the same time. In regards to performance, we actually were pretty nicely surprised to know that this doesn't take that much resources, at least for modern machines, right, to run. So this works pretty dang well on Switch, on low-end PCs that can run the game, of course, but it doesn't really hog that much resources. FMOD has a great profiling feature for that, and this is probably the most difficult and time-consuming part of the whole project when it comes to music. This part right here, because as you can see, there are a lot of transitions, and I had to make sure that all of them sounded right. So I did come here and play it and test the transition. Then I play it and wait until it's on the next one and test the transition. Then I keep doing that to every single transition that I did there, adjusting as necessary, because sometimes it would be off. Sometimes I need to re-render that specific part, and it was a lot of work, but I'm pretty happy with the results. One other thing is that FMOD, as far as I know, and if you know that, please tap it on in the comments below and let me know how much work I did that I didn't have to, if that is a possibility. But FMOD, when you take the sounds here, if you say take effects here, like anything here, and you have multiple ones, and you drag and drop them, it'll create a multi-instrument with all of these sounds inside. Now, for the standard use case, this is amazing. This is really helpful, and it streamlines a lot of the process. What this means is that every time this instrument plays, a different one of these sounds plays. But that is exactly what I don't want here. I wanted all of these to be different sound clips, sound items. What happens is, whenever I had all of those, I would come here into the music and say hearts, and then I have here on the sections and say I wanted to have all of these, then what would be dragging and dropping, just like that. And then I would time all of them. And if they had to be set as asynchronous, I would set that as well. A lot of changes you can, once they are already there, you can change a lot of stuff by selecting multiple ones of them. You don't have to do them one by one, but the adding process was pretty tedious. After it was done, and we tested it in game a lot of times, and it worked pretty well, and then we said, okay, we're good to go, and we're probably going to do this for the whole game. Most of the game doesn't have that much of a necessity of timing. This is a really standout part of it that we really wanted to drive home that sync with the music and the visual impact. So this is how it was done. Now, I mentioned the synth volume and the fall being really important, and here is why. When the next song starts, as Ina falls into the synth, and so once you play that, and so what we did was the programmer, Bruno, he put a trigger box there, and once the Ina hits it, and she's, we calculated the distance that she would take to hit the send, then he would play this event. So she's coming down, the volume is getting lower, and then once she's about to hit the send, this comes in the sync. Now, it will get stuck in a loop here, and it has a transition, which means that it will, only once the player has left the send room, it will go to the next one. And so what is going on here is that we have all these little pieces of music here for all the different instruments, and they're separate, and some of them don't have to be chopped up into many tiny pieces. And also some of them, they aren't perfectly the same size as the loop. So what I did was I just made an event inside which has all the other events that are playing, and it'll keep looping here inside, and it'll kind of change how it syncs up with the rest of the music, but still on beat. And you can see that there are some different transition markers here, because some of them are different from the others. This one is shorter, this one you can see is longer. This is just so that it made sense musically for the transition to happen whenever you reach towards the end of the heart. So for example, and if we were to swap it over here, so this is how we did the music for the heart. So let's have a look at the dungeon and see if there's anything interesting here to have a look. First one of the dungeon, is pretty simple. It starts with a silence loop. It's just so we have the event running when necessary. And once you get into the room with the Joker and the Thief, it changes into the song. And I wanted there to be and what happens is that as you get closer to both of them, the song gets clearer. So we used again that proximity effect, and as you get closer to them, the song gets a bit clearer by swapping these layers. I also have some dialogue parts here, which is some little melodies that only play while you're talking to them. And what I really liked about doing this way is that it comes in naturally, without fades, it's just a phrase in the instrument that is played. And even if you get out of the dialogue while the instrument is playing one of these melodic phrases, it won't just stop like that. It'll play until the end and have a conclusion. And it goes on without that. Now, here for the moment that Ina starts exploring the dungeon, it's just a lot of most of the same things that I've already showed you, and some crossfading and some transitioning. There are some elements which only play once you are at a certain point of the dungeon. So for instance, these little, these percussive bass notes, they will only play once you are already a bit deep and get into the puzzle. This was just added, to add some more variation and create the intensity as you keep going deeper and deeper into the dungeon. So for instance, on this part of the song, you have already solved the puzzle and you're going over where the aggros are, and once you get to the point where Ina is just balancing over them and she comments on them, and then you get this come in, to just drive home the tension of the fear in that part. And as you get closer and closer to the big moments, where you have your first aggro chase, the song gets very much anticipatory for that moment. And at any point it will stay here, and at any point it can swap into the chase music, which will then and on these parts, these loops, they are very much just a single file, and these they are all the drum hits that I separated so that once the chase ends, you can just end with a bang. Now, as for the third part, this is from where Ina acquires the power to manipulate the spirits of energy. And so, some interesting things here. I used a scatterer. Okay, so just a quick rundown of what the scatterer does, very basically. You add events or sounds to it, and it will, in a determined randomness or time that you decide, and with a lot of other possible randomness, scatter these sounds. It will create them, and it will randomize a lot of aspects every time that it plays. Usually you use scatterers for stuff like bird sounds, where you are in a forest and then you want bird sounds to come. Sometimes it comes from your right, sometimes it's right above you, sometimes it's way further to the left and very far away from you, sometimes it's very close. And the scatterer does all that really easily. But in this case, I wanted some effects coming from random directions. But what happens with the scatterer is that if you wanted to randomize this direction, it'll be a 3D. It will create a spatializer which will transform the sound in 3D. And if the music was to be a 3D event, we would kind of have to create some kind of script to make the emitter follow the player, or else the sound would kind of be distorted as you moved around inside the area that the music is playing. So basically, we did a little workaround here, which is if you set the minimum and maximum scatter distance to the minimum, it won't need the spatializer because it won't be spatializing anything. And so what I did here is I added just a single event here, and inside this event I added the multiple sounds that can play. What I did was I set their chance of triggering, so it only has a 35% chance of triggering. So if I play here, nothing happens, play, nothing happens, play, nothing happens, and then something happens. And what I did here was I randomized the panning. So every time this event is called, the pan, the position of the sound is randomized. So every time the scatterer calls this, there is a chance that it might play, and then it will be at a random position, and you don't need the spatializer. I also have an event here, and these have different chances of playing the little melody, just to kind of break the monotony of this whole ambient piece here with a bit of the music of the dungeon. And here's what this sounds like if you want to listen. So this part of the music, it has a value called dungeon intensity. It changes, as you might expect, the intensity of the music. This is used in different places, so that if you are very far from any enemies, you have this here, which is very calm, and here is the trigger. And if you are nearing the place where an enemy is, then it'll get that deep sound in. And once you get to a place where you meet an enemy, it'll get more intense. And what happens here is we have a value for if the enemy is actively chasing you, such as this, or if it knows you're there but it's not actually chasing you, it's just looking for you, which is, intense but not as much. Now, you might be wondering why this only goes to 3 while I still have a lot of more parameter here. It's because on the first iterations of aggro, he would actually kind of use some kind of vacuum powers and suck you in and capture Ina. And we had something here that as he was capturing you, the song will get more and more muffled. But this hasn't been in the game, and we didn't bother changing the parameter since it didn't change anything. Here's another possibly interesting thing here that happens. There's a section where you are facing an aggro. He's chasing you, and then you have to put the light, and then he will be scared of the light. And you have to take the light out, put it into a carryable lantern. And then as you grab that lantern, you were running towards him and you were pushing him into the hole. And I felt like that was a moment that was, needed to be emphasized in the music, because it's the moment that Ina starts fighting back. And so to really drive home this idea of gathering your courage, what I did was I created this little thing here, which works once again with that proximity thing. So once you are pushing the aggro, this thing will start playing, and it has a lot of different drum effects, and it will build up, and then aggro falls. So what happens here is this. So let's really to drive home that idea of I'm turning the table now. You know, just playing the good old, you know, reverse card on the creature that has been chasing you so much. The way I did that, and once again, I'd like to reiterate that disclaimer from the start. There might be much more efficient ways of doing it. It was just the way that my mind found, and it worked, and this is how it is in the game. So we have this, and this is the event that is being called here, and it has a lot of different little sound clips, and all these are the little drum hits. And what happens is each of these pairs, they have a specific range of that parameter, which is based on how close aggro is to the pit. And you know, it only happens if you are pushing aggro, so it doesn't happen if you're kind of running away from him over to that side, as we've seen some people manage to do. Here, as the parameter gets higher and higher, the intensity of each of these hits gets stronger and stronger. So for instance, and that culminates into transitioning into this section, which is just, you know, the hit. And since we're, you know, and then I fade out the other parts. So that's it for this part. Some more interesting things here that might be worth mentioning. Once you get through this part, you have a series of chains that you have to hang on to as you are making your way above a region where one of the creatures is waiting for you down there. And, you know, to kind of make that more frightening, I just added something here that what happens is once you grab the first chain, it'll start some tension, and then once you jump into the platform, there's the next one, and once you grab the third chain, there's this one. And once you are jumping to the final chain, it gets even more intense. And as you know, if you manage to grab it, that final chain falls, and no matter what, you fall and you have to run away from aggro. And then it just transitions into the classic aggro chase. There's not much to talk about with the part of the Flume and towards the end of the dungeon. Once again, these are all sliced into tiny pieces so that we can change into the Flume waking up theme whenever we want to. So it would sync up with the animation of, you know, it powering up and Flume waking up. And the only other noteworthy thing here, you may or may not have noticed that in-game, but if Flume is on, his little theme plays, and whenever he's powered off, those little bells go away. And once he powers back up, you get them back. And one thing I forgot to mention here, when you are switching between different levels, so from the heart to the dungeon and so on, there's the theme for the astral pathways. They were called astral corridors before, but here is how that works. It's relatively simple. It just happens that I wanted it to always happen on a beat, and the player still has control to walk left and right on those sections. So I made it so it would only progress when a player reached certain points. So we had a trigger. So for instance, on the first one, which is kind of a shorter corridor, once Ina hits the halfway point, it transitions into the next part. And so it will wait here on silence. So even if you go back to where it was before, it won't replay what you played before. And so it will go on once you hit the next point. And what happens here is that for longer corridors, you can go back to the start and do it all again. And we also have the endings here. Depending on where you're going to go, the ending is a little bit different. So for instance, if we're going to go to the dungeon, then you have this. But if you're going to the temple, then it will swap to this part, which is a bit different. Or the factory. You know, just giving a bit of the mood of the place you're going to while you're still in that transition period. Now the temple, this was really fun to work on. This one here is for the main parts of the temple, the little hub where you go to the other places. And what happens here is that if it's your first time in the temple, you come in from the dungeon, then you have the intro to play. You know, just to really have that stark contrast with where you were before. And there are some moments where you come back to the temple, or even if you reload inside the temple and you're not on the first checkpoint, where we don't want this intro to play again, so we just set like an arbitrary number here, like 15, to just go straight into the theme of the temple. Now, some things here. The temple has some sections here that are very melodic. Well, it also has the dialogue thing, where if you're talking to the architect, then you hear these little pizzicato strings. So there are these parts here with the flutes and the woodwinds, and on the temple you can transition to basically 3 different places. So first you're going to talk to the architect, and then you're going to go into a portal which takes you to another section of the temple. You're going to come back, then you're going to the other portal, and then you come back, and then you head to the next part. So what happens is that I wanted the music to transition very seamlessly into these parts. So it had 2 head conditions to each of these different endings that you're going to have. And these melodic parts, they were really sticking out and not really transitioning well into the other ones. So the solution we got is, if you're playing this and you get close to one of the portals which you're going to take, then the music just transitions to a section where it won't play any more of these. And once again, the good thing of playing these things is that it sounds very natural. It's just stop playing. You know, you don't fade it out or anything, so it doesn't really, as far as we could notice, it doesn't really catch your attention too much that it stopped playing. And so over here, I have a lot of different possible transitions here. And say I want to transition to part 2. This is when you take the portal. And then the song accompanies you as you are exploring the second part and heading towards the statue. And it so happens that you can, then the song will reach a loop and it will wait there until the right moment. And once you get to each of these parts, you walk a little bit on the temple, and then you'll get to a statue that will help Ina learn how to control a new spirit. I wanted this to be another, very important and synchronized moment. So there are many transitions here to different possible versions of the little ending song. And so this is what happens once you get to that. And again, it's not necessarily super tight to this precise millisecond when it happens, but it just so happens that it always syncs up very nicely if you have it happen frequently enough. And the same happens for the other parts. So if you were to take the portal to the second part, which is the Arboretum, and also, if you were to finish all the temple puzzles and come back to the architect, then you'll be sent to the pathway then you'll be sent to the last puzzle as you make your way into the factory. And this song also has a different ending, and it has a lot of different transitions there for that. Like this, or and once again here you have all the different possible variations of the ending, such as this, and it leads always into this one. Now for the second part of the temple, this one also has a lot going on and a lot of different parts. For the most part, you already know what I've talked about before, so different transitions depending on where you are. So once Ina learns to control the spirit of movement, then the elevator goes down, and once you get into the room with the first puzzle, you'll have a transition to that. Now, for this puzzle, we made some specifically on this one. There are some more sound cues that help you, kind of hear your progression in the puzzle. For instance, if you have one of the platforms active with the spirit of movement that you put on it, then you hear a little melody. If you have two, it gets stronger. And once they turn off, they won't play that anymore. Now, what happens is that you've got a pressure plate, which you can step on, and that will make the gate go up. And then once you step off of the pressure plate, the gate will start coming down, and you have to run over the platforms to make your way through the gate before it closes. Now, what happens here is that I've got both a gate open and a gate close sound. And these are two little events which are very overly complicated, and probably there are much easier ways to do this, but it was the way that my brain could work with that. And so what I'll do is I'll just raise their volume here so that they are more easily heard. So once you step on a pressure plate, this goes on, and then you hear the sound of the gate opening. And once you step off of the pressure plate, and this goes down, and you hear it closing. Now, why so many things? I wanted the gates to be very synced. I wanted this little sound to be synced with both the music and the gate itself. And that time was having a lot of variation as we were working on it and getting the timing of the puzzle right. What I did was make something that could be more easily changed once we, change the timing a little bit. So what happens here is I have these two events here, gate open and gate close, and they are a lot of audio clips. And what these are, they are just looping here on the rhythm, on the same rhythm and beat of the song. And each of these, once again, has a some specific conditions to play. So for instance, on the gate open here, it will only play once the pressure plate is on, because I don't want these to play as that value goes down, because then the gate is closing and I want the other one to play. Same for here. It only plays when the pressure plate is off. It doesn't play while it's on. Now, these are always playing, but you don't hear them because this is tied to how much the gate is open and closed, and this varies these values here. What the programmer actually does is it just sets, okay, so you're stepping on the pressure plate, then it's on. Stepping off, it's off. Once the gate starts to open, set this value here to 2. And this value here to 9. These numbers are quite arbitrary. What happens with these is they are asymmetric parameters. So this means they have different speeds for going up and going down. As you can see here, for the gate open, it goes up by 1 second, and it goes down by 0.19 second. And these were made to set the timing with the gates. And same here. It goes up really fast, and it goes down really slow. So what happens here is that once you are on the pressure plate and you have this event playing, then you set this to 2, and then each of them will play at the right time. Same here. If the pressure plate is, once the gate is open, then this will be at 9. So you step off the pressure plate, and then you have this, and then it starts going down. You might be wondering, why did I have to make it like this and not just, a straight thing that plays? It's because you can step on and off the pressure plate anytime. This means that the gate might only open up to a certain part and then starts closing. And what this means is that the parameters, since they are both moving together in the same rhythm, then they will be at the specific point. So for instance, if you step off the pressure plate and this value is in the gate was only half open, then it will start playing like this and then go down and end once the gate is closed. Same for it being open. You can start opening while it is still half closed, and so on and so forth. So I wanted this to always represent the stage that the gate was being open. So it's a lot of work for really simple stuff that probably wasn't even noticed by many people in the game. But it's here, and I really like the effect that it had on the game. And one last thing that happens in the same puzzle is that once you have the gate open and the platformers are there and you start running towards the gate to get through it while it is closing, I wanted the tension to be heightened for that because you're racing against time, and I wanted it to give that feeling of, oof, barely made it. So it's just a simple, this is a parameter here, and this is not a standard play thing where it goes from left to right, it's just the value of the parameter. So what happens here is that as the parameter goes up, and this is how close you are to the gate, it gets more and more intense, and then goes down. So this is you getting close to the gate and getting through it. And towards the end of this area, there is a little, there's a very infamous puzzle with the 2 platforms that you have to kind of put one up and then climb towards the gate. What happens here is that once you reach that gate, the song will start building up for the great moment where you have to put the spirit on the moving pole and then grab on it and ride between the vines. At any point here in the song, you can get to that point. And another interesting effect of doing the song this way is that, you know, you heard the woodwinds playing on the part, but if we were to swap before, it'll play this part as its transition. And it still sounds just as good, and you don't have to make other ones, you just let the thing play. And then it gets into this build-up loop. And so what happens here is you have this that keeps looping. You also have a little, I can find it, but there was this little lead here that it keeps playing, and it just plays on the first time, so the rest keeps looping. And so as you get closer and closer, the song gets more and more intense. Some parts change, you know, the tone of the piano changes, and you get the strings. And then once you get on the thing to do the right, it will go into that. And I wanted to be very much synchronized to that. And once again, you have that big, beautiful visual reward for getting through the whole section of the puzzle and the tempo. And then it waits until the right moment where you are up there, and then it will change to the right thing. And so it starts this piano loop here, and once you get to the final section and you add the spirits to restore part of the tower's inner workings, then the song goes into an ending. Now, we've already been here a really long time, so I'll just kind of skip over the third part of the tempo, the arboretum, because it's basically just the same things being made, just with different types of music and some different transitions at some point. But it's mostly the same thing. And let's have a look then at the factory, which is the final little piece of the music in Aspire. And so once you get to the factory, you have just a classic, you have just the basic talking with the guiding lights and all that. And then once you get down into the factory, you're going down into a little hole. Then it's time to face the big baddie, Shardak. So obviously we wanted to build up tension, because this is a great big fight that Ina has to make to finally be free of the tower. And so Shardak is there waiting. And then once you are making your way towards him, then this will keep looping. Once Shardak's mechanics were defined, and I noticed that, hey, he has a rhythm. He attacks every so often, and it's a fixed time. I decided that I really wanted to make the audio reflect the rhythm of the attacks of the boss, so that you don't only have the visual cues, but also you can kind of follow the beat of the music and internalize the rhythm of when you can move and when you have to hide from the boss, because every once in a while he will attack, and if you are unprotected, then you are done for. And so what we did here was a lot of testing and making sure that we did the transitions at the right time. I sat down with Bruno, or once again our lead dev, and we just tested it out until it was done. Of course, in order to compose this, I already knew the timing of the attack, so I could make it in a rhythm that that matched his attacks. So this was already composed with this in mind. So once you get there and you meet Shardak, you'll notice that the music syncs up quite nicely with his attacks. So every time it reaches the end of the loop, and that's the attack. And so we also made some other audio things. So once you are exposed, the song gets more intense, and if you are undercover, then you don't have that. This is both a mix of the standard crossfade and also some drums that come in only if this is triggered. Now, you might notice that these little pieces here, they are very, 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 very small. This was done because sometimes when we were testing, or there were some transitions happening, it could happen that it played but you didn't want it to play. So as it is asynchronous, it started playing out of time and out of sync with the song. So this was just made to make sure everything worked correctly here. One thing here I'm adding in post. Might notice that I have also a loop reset here and all that. And these are here so that if you die to Shardak and you respawn, and what happens is that he doesn't start attacking immediately. So what we did was we connected FMOD Studio with the game through the live update feature, which is really awesome. You can mess around and change stuff in real time as you are testing the game. And I found the perfect spot to send the song as soon as it starts playing, so that it will sync up perfectly with Shardak once it starts attacking again. One last thing here that I think might be interesting is the part where you turn off Shardak. And you have a little section here that is called the lever loop that works very much like pushing the one for pushing the aggro down. And so as you are pushing the lever to kind of turn off one of Shardak's terminals, I wanted it to really get more and more intense as you are finally doing that after having escaped him. So it sounds like this. And this again is just something that the programmer added there. It made so that the progress of the animation of pushing the lever would work. And the reason this is done like this is because, you know, you can stop pushing the lever and then this will just go back down. For the second part of Shardak, most of the song works very much the same. Here's a quick look at all the moving pieces there. Just the change here was Shardak is now a bit weaker, and so he attacks with less frequency. And it just so happens that the timing that they found out in playtesting, with basically little to no change of the timing that they found was good, meant just an extra bar at the end of each loop of the song. So what I had to do is compose it like this so that it would sync up with his attacks. And then again, you have a lot of different sections. And things that only come in once you are at a certain point of the music, such as these little things here. So that's basically it, and of the noteworthy things, I believe. And of course, some other things are simpler, right? So, for instance, here for the final battle, we didn't need to have it all broken up into pieces in lots of different layers. Just have the song playing out here. And once you get to a point where you've escaped Shardak and he's breaking everything down, and you finally make it to the top, then the song will just give way to just percussion. So there's that expectation of what's gonna happen, and then once Shardak comes back, the song will go into a big dangerous moment. And once again, I did the same thing with the lever, but this time for the final moment where you are turning off Shardak, and I wanted that to be the big triumph. So this is how it works. Shardak will appear, and then this will keep playing as you're running away from him. And then as you start pushing the lever, and then the big climax as you defeat the big bad beast. I think that's most of the noteworthy things here. For instance, the title screen is a very simple thing, just has the heartbeats there. And so how about we talk about some of the other things. So we have here Ambience. Let's talk a bit about Ambience effects interface. These here, they are a lot more standard than what I did with the music in regards to implementation, because there really wasn't that much of a need to chop things up and all that, just using the standard fare that FMOD was made to do. So how about we start here? For instance, interface is just sounds that play when they have to be played, and they'll have, you know, some variation. They will change the pitch every time I play them. They'll have some volume variation, so they're moving the cursor. And that kind of thing. So jumping over here to the ambience. Now, when you first start the game and Ina is waking up, you'll hear this beating in the background. And this is symbolizing the heart, and once Ina, the heart of the tower, starts going away, you have once again that proximity effect, which will just make so that as she goes further and further away from the start, the heartbeat gets deeper and deeper until it is no longer there. And this is very simple to do. I just had the event here with the heartbeats, the sounds for those. And just by lowering the pitch based on the parameter, it already makes them go slower and slower. So that was the effect I was looking for. So that was very handy. For the overall ambience of the heart, I just used some loops and some scattering for the wind and for some debris, because the heart is all shattered. So every once in a while, you have a list of a ton of different debris sound effects that will be played randomly, and they will have, once again, the same thing that I explained before. We didn't want to use a 3D sound for this because it had some weird effects as you moved around. And so we put it down at the minimum, the scatterer, and here I randomize the pen so that whenever this event plays, it will be at a random panning, random side, so left, right, a bit more to the middle. And so that's how this is built. And then we have the interval here, so every 3.5 to 12 seconds it will play. And also a little hard amp location here parameter, which just changes if you are in an open space or in a closed space. Same here happens with the dungeon. It's just that it has both a location for open and closed, and also a intensity. As you get deeper and deeper into the dungeon, it gets more and more of those sound effects of metal and, you know, weird sounds coming from all over the place, like that. So just your standard fare for the ambience, and that just goes on and on for the rest of them. As for the effects, let's see here some things that might be worth noting. Scenes, these are just every single sound effect that is linked to kind of a cutscene. So these are just, you know, standard play the sound effect, and that is it. Here we have all the characters, all their sounds, all their expressions, also the enemies. And I'll go into a little bit about some interesting sounds in here. Also, huge thanks to my lovely fiancée, Laura, who helped me. And our sound team for Aspire consisted of me. So there were a lot of voices for characters for a single person to do. So she helped me out with the voices of Ina and the architect. And I did the voice for the guiding light and the thief. And the Joker is actually mostly her voice, but also a little bit of mine combined in there, just to kind of give a different feel for that. One extra thing, Aggro, the beast that chases you around in the dungeon, they are voiced by Joey, one of my little doggos. Here for Ina, most of these are your basic stuff, such as, you know, all of her expressions. But some things that are interesting here, specifically, is on her footsteps, which, you know, have the standard fare of checking which surface she's in. So we have some global parameters here. So for instance, footstep. So for instance, in a surface just determines what she's stepping on, so it plays the correct sound effect. So for instance, this is the basic one. And if she's standing on metal, there's another one. And if she's standing on grass, there's another one. So on and so forth. and these are all just, you know, triggered by the parameter. They have their variations and all that. And you might notice here there's a little track here called magic. And what this is this event here called in a footstep magic, which plays here and also when she jumps. I made these little sounds here to kind of, you know, whenever Ina steps, there's a little bit of magic that comes out, and so it plays every time she steps. And so I made all of these to be randomized, so there are a lot of different notes inside each of these. And you may notice that I have a lot of different mode instruments here. Now, each of these are labeled by the notes that they are. So for example, A, high A, low A, or C. And whenever she was at a specific place, the sound didn't quite match with the music that was playing. So I made different mode instruments here that will play depending on which section of the game she's in. So if she's in the heart, this value will be at 1. And so she'll only play little magic sounds that are in tune with the music of the heart. And if she's in the dungeon, then they will be in tune with the music of the dungeon. Now, this is one of those things that I probably didn't notice while playing the game, but you probably would have noticed if I hadn't done that. Okay, so some other interesting things here that happen with the characters. For instance, when you get to the dungeon, you'll notice that the thief and the Joker and the thief, they are talking from their cages with one another, and so we made a sound that just, you know, it's a scatter once again that just alternates. I set it to sequential, so it plays first from the thief, then the Joker, then the thief, then the Joker, and it just has some of their voice lines here, and it just alternates as if they were speaking with a little bit of variation. So, and it will be coming from them. So that's why we use the spatializer here. It's coming from their little cages, and as you get closer and closer, you can hear them better. Another one that might be interesting here is Shardak. He has an idle sound. And you might be noticing that there's nothing here. What happens is I have a little thing here for the parameter once again, just like I did for the strings when you were running through the gate to the temple. And what this is Shardak speed is determined, is a parameter that is determined by how fast Shardak is moving. So if I stop, you'll be listening to it this. And once it starts moving faster and faster, you will get some of these will be pitched up and others will come in. So you might notice that it has a bit of a 6-speed here. It's just to make sure that it's gradual no matter how quickly this changes. So even if it just jumps to max speed, it won't be that jarring, you know, just boom, jump on that. And as for the objects, let's see if there's anything that's noteworthy here that might be interesting to show. I mentioned at the start of the video when I was doing that quick basics explanation that there were some parameters here, and I was going to explain that. This is the sound for when a metal box lands on the ground. And we have here something called fall height. And as I mentioned before, the game is very based on physics. So what we did was the speed, the energy with which the box is falling, once it hits the ground, Bruno made a script to translate that into a value from 0 to 1 in a way that this determines the volume of the sound of the impact. So if it falls from a really big height, you'll hear a really loud sound. If it falls from a small height, you'll hear a small sound. And this even helps with, for instance, once the box hits and then it goes up a little bit because of the inertia and then hits back the ground, then it'll be like a big one for the first one, and then when it just touches the ground, it sounds much more natural. And that's just with one event that gets automatically fed to that. Something kind of similar is done for the chains in the dungeon, because wanted them to sound like chains. And so I talked to Bruno, and he worked out a way to take the various links, because the chains are like a lot of different sections that work with physics, and I don't know much about the details of that, but he could kind of average their speed, their momentum, and convert that into a parameter. And what this means is that this is just a loop of the chain sounds, but it's coming from the chains. Whenever their speed changes, then you get this volume change, and this combined with the fact that they're moving around creates quite a convincing illusion of the sound of the chains. For elevators, it was mostly just a matter of making them have a loop and then move to the end once they finish their moving. So we have here something called moving, and if it's true, then the elevator is moving, and it will keep looping, and once it turns off, it just turns off. Now, this specific one worked really well because the loop was quite seamless over here, and I made it so. But for some other ones, I would split these into 3 different parts just to make sure that they loop correctly and have some good transitions. So for things like the fountains that there are a lot of in the temple and the dungeon, we also made it. I also did some things here, such as randomizing their start. So setting the start offset to 50% and then adding some randomization means that every time that this event is called, it starts from a different place. As you can see, it jumps around. Just so it's not, exactly the same sound playing when you're going through 2 fountains. We also had a lot of things, a lot of different things, such as, having some electric sparks that the programmer just called the events whenever the spark came out in the animation, and that was synced up really nicely. We also had this, which I'm not sure if it made to the final game, but as you get closer and closer to that bridge from the heart for the jump, this would get stronger and stronger, and then as you go past it, it goes back down again by the proximity effect. I think that's mostly it. Now, one more thing that might be interesting is the routing. This is more of the technical part. What I did here was just I grouped everything, every type of sound into a specific one. I have the VCAs here so that the player can control the volume of these things on the menu, so you can lower the volume of music, SFX separately, or the master one. And here we just group them so we can mix them and apply the effects only on what we want to. You might see here that I also separated each NPC and one of the enemies here just for effects that and some mixing that I did for the final pass, because there's gotta make sure that the volumes are all balanced and making sure the game sounds good. And as you can see, the thief sound effects were really low volume, and it was easier to just pull this up and rather than going back and re-exporting everything. About the effects, most of the snapshots, with the exception of one, were just reverbs. And these were these snapshots. They're basically kind of save states. You save some information, and then once you tell FMOD to play one of these, it will apply those remember configurations. So for instance, here's our reverb, and it has nothing is going to it, no sound is coming from it. Let me just here. As you can see, there's nothing coming from here. Now, once we get into one of these snapshots, you can see that the reverb is the effects are now sending to the reverb, and here on the reverb, I have just the wet signal, not the dry, so it's not playing again that same sound. And each of these snapshots has different reverb settings, different wet levels, different, various things. It also has some AHDSR, so that this was applied into a lot of, most if not all of the music and ambience and all that, just to make sure there are not, super jump cuts on everything. And what this means is that once you play it, it has a little bit of an attack, and then it goes a bit down. For most of the music and all that, I like to use an HDSR that's more like this, so it kind of fades in more naturally, and also on the fade out. But for the effects here, this works well just to not be jarring and be able to swap between the reverbs quite well. So here we have the, for instance, the general reverb of the heart. So this is the dry sound. And once we play, you can see here little yellow balls and hear the difference. And also we have different reverbs for different places. So if you are in a tight passage or in a scrolling, it sounds more cramped. The large rooms of the temple are even lusher than the heart. And so on and so forth, and even some really over-the-top ones, such as when you are on the astral pathways. One other effect here, and I'll just use the dragging sound here to exemplify this one. It's the slow motion effect that happens, I believe. I'm not sure if this one actually plays when you're jumping over the bridge, but it also plays when Sharda comes back at the end of the game and everything goes into slow motion. And all it does is it takes the effects and ambience group and it just pitches them down gradually, of course. Here's the attack. And the effect that you get is this. Say, you're dragging the box here and just this volume. And then once you go into slow motion, so that was a look at how we implemented the music effects and all of that for Aspire in a sale. Thank you very, very much for your time. I hope this was informative or at least entertaining. And if you have any questions, if you want to drop any comments below, if you are someone who understands a lot about game audio, I'd love to know what I could do better. That would be great to know better ways of achieving these results. But anyway, thank you very much for joining me. Once again, thank you for watching. Thank you very much for everyone who played or has any interest in Aspire. Every single person sharing the game and talking about it and playing it, it means just a lot to us. Hope you're having a great day, great week, and take care. Bye-bye.